my name's Emily. I'm a filmmaker currently based in Brussels, Belgium, and I've been lucky enough to travel a bit around Europe. But this year I wanted to take a trip somewhere different. I wanted to discover a new culture and share what I learned through video. So I decided to visit my Israeli friend Zahar. I would spend a few days with him in the north of Israel before travelling solo in the south. Halfway to the airport, I get a notification on my phone telling me that a lot of rockets are hitting Israel from Gaza, and the first Israeli civilian to be killed since 2014 has died. My friends and family telling me to be careful didn't feel silly anymore. So I texted Zahar, and he reminded me that this trip was only as dangerous as a night out in London or Brussels. I made it to Israel. And on my first day, Zahar and his girlfriend Shaked were taking me around the north, close to their home in Haifa. So right now, about 2/3 of the Golan Heights is under Israeli occupation, and another third still belongs to Syria. The Golan Heights are to the north of Israel. They were undisputed Syrian territory until 1967, when they were occupied by Israel during the Six-Day War. Israel annexed the Golan Heights in 1981. Today, the land is mostly made up of Israeli settlements, with a few Syrian villages left, and as of 2012, around 20,000 of the Druze religious community. From Mount Bental, where we went, you can actually go and visit an old Syrian military barracks, and you can actually look across and see into Syria. It was my first glimpse into Israel's controversies and just how many different experiences exist within its borders. There were multiple conflicting views, and from what I'd learned so far, it seemed impossible to summarise it into a black and white narrative. On our second day, we visited Caesarea, an ancient city built over 2,000 years ago. The city has lived many lives. It was fought over in wars like the Arab conquest and the 12th century Crusades. Last century, it was even a Bosnian fishing village and a kibbutz. And then in about 1952, it started to be renovated into the national park that it is today. Being ruled over by so many empires is one of the things that makes it such an impressive archaeological site, and new discoveries are still being made. After our trip to Caesarea, I spoke to Zahar about my fears on sharing a story about Israel. I didn't think I was qualified to talk about a country with such complex political tensions, but Zahar reminded me that in most ways Israel is just like any other country. It's full of people, some who agree with what their politicians are doing, and many who don't. So, today is my third day in Israel. I've left Haifa in the north and I've come back to Tel Aviv. For the next 24 hours or so, I'm going to be exploring here. Now, I've chosen to travel here on what is known as Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a remembrance day for Israelis who have died in service or as a result of terrorist attacks. In Israel, it is obligatory to serve 2 or 3 years of military duty. Military conscription was introduced when Israel was a new state as a defence strategy against neighbouring countries. Today, it still exists, so most Israelis have served and many have personally lost a friend or relative in service. Since today is a day of reflection, I was warned that maybe there wouldn't be so much going on in the centre of Tel Aviv, and so today would be the perfect opportunity to explore Jaffa. So in Judaism, the day ends when the sun sets. So that also means that Memorial Day here will end in a few hours' time, which will also signify the start of Independence Day. Yom Ha'atzmaut marks the anniversary in the Hebrew calendar of when David Ben-Gurion declared Israel as an independent state. For this reason, the day doesn't have the same significance for all communities in Israel. But as the sun sets on Remembrance Day, both children and adults fill the streets in celebration. Next, I was headed to Jerusalem. I reunited with Zahar and Shaked, and our first stop was the Old City. The Old City of Jerusalem is made up of 4 quarters, each representing a different faith. There aren't many places that allow you to peek into the devotion of so many cultures and religions. As the sun sets and Sabbath begins, the Jewish quarter dims into empty streets. Muslims overflow into the shuks of the Islamic quarter as they leave the mosque after their prayers. In the Holy Sepulchre, believers press their bodies close to the stone of anointment, where Jesus' body is said to have been laid and anointed after his crucifixion. Jewish worshippers hold onto the Western Wall in prayer, but it's hard not to be reminded of the tensions that exist here. In Jerusalem, we were hosted by Zahar's family friends. Yaakov took us to the local market to buy ingredients for our meal.
You like something? Dried mango.
We spent the Sabbath learning how to cook dishes like these dumplings called kube.
You see, like this?
A moment that will stay with me was when one family member asked me if I felt safe living in Brussels. I didn't understand at first, but apparently it's quite a common question. After the terror attacks over the last decade around Europe, many Israelis have fears that Brussels, Paris or London are dangerous places to visit. That moment of panic on my train journey now felt completely ironic. It was time to start the solo part of my trip. A 3-day road trip through the desert. So even though I hadn't driven in 2 years and I'd only ever driven on the left side of the road in the UK, and I'd never rented a car for myself before, I rented a car. So it's 4:40 a.m. and today is the day that I hike the Masada to watch the sunrise over the desert. Masada is one of Israel's most famous sites, an ancient fortress sat on a rock plateau in the middle of the desert. It's also a symbol of heroism in modern Judaism because the residing Jewish zealots, that's a rebel group who wanted to expel Romans from the Holy Land, killed themselves rather than submitting to the approaching Roman army. The hike was a little trickier than I was expecting. The views were incredible. You can look over the Dead Sea, you can wander through this old fortress and learn a bit about how people used to live there. Just imagining people 2,000 years ago hiking up that same trail that I hiked up. Admittedly, they've probably made it a bit easier now, but I mean, all the more reason to be amazed by it. So now I'm in the Negev desert and I've been staying in a city or a town called Mitzpe Ramon, which is right next to the Ramon crater, which was the main reason that I wanted to visit here. Mitzpe Ramon is a strange city. It was empty, like deserted, and there seemed to be a very diverse population. Mitzpe Ramon was built in the 1950s and today it's home to communities from North Africa, Black Hebrew Israelites and the former USSR. Today it's a tourist destination for those who are looking for isolation or to escape from the city. Personally, I travelled there because I wanted to see a different side of Israel. But it's also true that I wanted time alone to reflect, to create new memories, relying on myself and navigating the desert. I'm really grateful to the people who shared their homes and their conversations and their food with me. And I was right to think I'm the wrong person to analyse what's happening in Israel. But I can share my journey of learning about the people here and what it looks like in a place you may only think about when it's on the news. I think if we can be less afraid of sharing while we're learning, then the fear of being wrong won't keep us stuck.